Hello everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today's video is Sin, finding the true path of spirit in a maze of false religions, right? The Optimum Trajectory is the subtitle, and just talking about kind of more just general metaphysics and religion and spiritual concepts and how it, interfaces with everything here in this physical world. Kind of continuing in the general theme of the videos in a sense. But, I've just really been thinking about this, because I've kind of reflected on, why people are so averse to religion, why I was so averse to religion, and I still am averse to religion, but I've actually come around to religious concepts, spiritual and metaphysical concepts, when you learn to see beyond the veil being this physical world and this kind of world of illusions. Because, I think the spiritualist and the materialist alike will agree that our experience here in any given moment with our eyes and ears and other senses of taste and touch and these are limited, right? We don't actually perceive everything that's happening. It's physically impossible. Keeping it within the purely physical, many people are aware that our eyes only see, essentially the visual light spectrum, and not even the entire. Well, I guess it's by default it's all the visual spectrum. But what I mean by that is just what we consider to be the spectrum wavelengths, the spectral wavelengths of the visible light spectrum, from right at the edge of ultraviolet going into violet and indigo, and then on the other side red, deep red going into infrared and heat. And everything is connected. Ken Wheeler, his hypothesis and kind of theory that he's been elaborating on is that essentially just above gamma rays, there is essentially the universal particle, which is the hydrogen atom, right? Which is the single proton and the single neutron. And that is kind of that fractal, vortex, spiraling energy, commensurate structure that is the foundation of all the structures in the universe, from the biological to the chemical to the galactic and the planetary and the solar. All of these are just different spirals within spirals, of the hourglass and the donut, right? The toroid and the hyperboloid, with the donut wrapped around the hourglass. And, that is absolutely the structure of magnetic fields, where, it's so funny because an average intelligence person, let alone somebody who's high intelligence, can go onto the internet and find, yes, there's a lot of nonsense and bullshit on the internet, but there is also the vast sea of good-intentioned people who are seeking the truth in good faith and providing insights into their own journey of discovery. And that is what is causing the frequency shift of this planet right now, and the end of one age and the beginning of another, right? I'm not a new ager. I'm completely averse to that term, but that doesn't mean that I'm completely ignorant of what the ancients considered to be these recurring time cycles, right? There's a lot of bullshit said about what, these different epochs mean, but I feel like I've got a better grasp of it than most people. And so when people, throw around pejoratives, I usually tend to discount it, right? I get called a libtard by delusional boomers who just figured out hashtags. I get called, a conspiracy theorist by people who believe that Russia is controlling Trump's, microwave and toaster oven and controlling his brain with electronic levers, right? And to the same people who think that it's just absolutely inconceivable that people of power, billionaires and millionaires, would collude for their own self-interest. I mean, that's just, there's no way that could ever happen, right? It's just, there's such an infantile world that these people live in. And it is a result of, again, Plato's allegory of the cave. He nailed it thousands of years ago, and it's still completely relevant today, describing the spiritual and psychological state of the species, and how one can learn to be more like the absolute, how to come closer to God by raising up one's awareness and insight into oneself, right? Temet noske, if you know yourself, you will know the universe, you will know God, because you are part of that fractal structure that God created. Essentially, we are the cells of God, and we are the God of ourselves. And so how do you treat the cells of your body? Again, it's a full spectrum thing. If you claim to be a person of Christ, if you claim to be a person of God, a religious person, a moral person, but you treat your body as if they are whipped and chained slaves, essentially building monuments for your own entertainment just to be destroyed, I mean, why would the inhabitants of that universe respect such a divine prerogative? Right? It's not very admirable to be that kind of tyrant to your own selves. But it usually, again, is part of a fractal element, that people are tyrannical to themselves because they are in a highly stressful environment in their lives, and they feel that they are being tyrannized by others. And so it's kind of their coping mechanism, almost how kids who get beaten, right, they'll start beating and torturing animals because it's their escape, and that's replication of that trauma that's happening within the human frame. It very much is, and it continues well into adulthood. There are people who are far my senior in terms of years on this planet in this physical lifetime, but they are absolute mental children. They are toddlers. I mean, literally, today was a challenging morning, and it's when people don't. It's very hard when your emotions are flaring and you don't understand language and you don't even know what you want. Right? It's hard to be a toddler. Like, I get it. I see it every single day. Trust me. But this is how adults act in this society. The ones who call themselves highly educated and cosmopolitan. The ones who read the New York Times and the Washington Post. The ones who went to university. Who paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, either themselves, through debt, or through, from their parents, right? Which, I was fortunate enough to be the latter category. Although I told my grandmother and my dad before I went, I was like, I don't need this. I would rather you give me that amount of money to invest and start my own business. But if you want me to go to college and it means that much to you for me to have a university degree, then I will go and I will make this experience what I will, and it won't be for you, it'll be for me. And, I will use it for productive ends, but just understand that this is extrinsically valuable. It has no intrinsic value except for the experience itself taken consciously and deliberately, which I did. And the business plan that I came up with in a certain, hyperdimensional state of mind actually is now the business plan that I am engaging 10 years later, actually 11 years later. That was back in 2009. And it is just, again, it's all because I designed this timeline. I created this timeline. I established my firm foothold within this river, and, I start to move within it. And anybody can do that, is my belief. I see very little evidence that my belief is true most of the time. And this has kind of been a constant source of consternation for myself as a child, because I never understood why people couldn't see the things that I did. It was so obvious. Everything is so obvious to me. Like, I don't even take IQ tests because I don't care about comparing myself to other people. The only person who I feel like is possibly my mental superior is Ken Wheeler. For those who don't know, I reference him a lot. Most of you know who he is. Theoria Apophasis is a YouTube channel, and one of my brethren on YouTube who is defending the ether as a scientific concept against the Einsteinian acolytes who literally know nothing about physics except to just keep filleting their dead pedophile idol, which is Einstein. And again, it's so funny, all these videos, like Veritasium, which is, again, a huge YouTube channel, millions and millions of views. They put out this video the other day about gravity, like why gravity isn't a force, right? And it's true, in their model, gravity is not a force. Gravity is just a bending of space-time, right? Whatever that means. It doesn't actually explain anything in a causal term. Bending space-time, that's bending a unicorn fart. What is space-time? How is space and time equivalent? How is light the constant, but time can be manipulated? And we can have a time machine, but we can't change the speed of light in a vacuum. It's a fundamentally absurd premise, and Dayton Miller disproved it back in 1933. Actually, it was in the 20s, right? But it was right in the middle of all this, relativity heyday, and the Eddington eclipse proved it, right? This dude with a land-based telescope shooting through some clouds on some photo plates in 1919 was able to measure, deflection of light down to the resolution of 1/100th of an arc second. Get the fuck out of here. It's just so patently absurd, and yet these people who, again, are like mathematically the top of their world. They think that they're geniuses, and they defend this experiment as if it was actually proof. And then when if you actually start to doubt it, they'll just say, well, there's been numerous experiments since then that have confirmed it as well. Have they really? Have we basically examined the claim that light is a constant in vacuum and in controlled conditions? We have not established that. They always point to Michelson Morley, which was, it actually did not achieve a null result. It did not prove their hypothesis, which was of a significantly greater measurement for an ether drift. And so basically, because it didn't match their hypothesis, they called it a null result. But it is not a null result. It gained a positive result, showing a differential in the speed of light through an optical interferometer, corresponding with the sidereal calendar of the Earth. In essence, the Earth's position around the sun, right? It's almost like if you had like if I swung a ball, if I stood on top of this car, somebody did, and I swung a ball around, right? The wind coming at this car is the ether wind. I'm swinging this ball around, and so it felt, if you were on that ball or a sensor was on that ball, as it went around this car, it would have a differential sort of pattern, right? It would show basically, sometimes it's more exposed to the wind on the side of the car, but when it's behind the car, it has less of an impact from the solar wind. It feels less of that solar wind. And so that is essentially exactly the signal that was detected. And I actually just got a whole book on this by Dr. James DeMeo, PhD. He's where actually I learned about a lot of this stuff, but I finally decided to buy some of his books and kick him some cash for all the wisdom and information he's offered. But essentially, Michelson Morley was essentially an inferior experiment and an inferior data set when compared to Dayton Miller's data set on the top of Mount Wilson in the 20s and published in 1933, essentially showing that definitive sinusoidal pattern corresponding with the sidereal calendar. And so essentially proving that there is a general ether wind, that we are not in relativity where everything is just a relative frame of reference, but there is a universal frame of reference, and thus there's a universal construct, there's a universal flow. And I would call that universal flow, which generates all activity in the universe, I would say that that is the will of God, right? I would say that that is the physical analog of the spiritual concept of the will of God. It is this flow of energy throughout the universe, that it follows a universal structure. It has a definitive, well, maybe not definitive, it has a meaning, right? And we may not be able to define that. And I think that our attempts to do that is how we get religion. And some of that has been very valuable and valiant. In other senses, it has been less than valuable and less than valiant. And it has led to the stifling of the growth of the mind and the body and the spirit, instead of its promotion, which is, at least ostensibly what it is for. And, I would like to return to a sort of a spiritual religious tradition, or develop one anew, or maybe it's already here and we just basically, it's just about turning on that light bulb and realizing, what is in front of you. But I still see these flaws, these fatal flaws in a lot of the especially, the forms of Christianity. And I think that people, again, it's like people who read Lord of the Rings, and they get really caught up in the lore of Lord of the Rings, and it's very cool, it's a very important story, but at the same time, you also, for me, what's more important than knowing all the different characters and lore of Lord of the Rings is knowing what the story meant and what it was about, and how it's a meaningful, impactful, moral lesson for basically the reader, for the audience. To me, I fail to understand why the literal interpretation would be the most important. It shouldn't be disregarded, but I think that the Bible is written in riddles. All these spiritual texts, they're written in poetry, they're written in riddles. You have to be of a certain dimensional outlook just to understand what these riddles even mean at a certain point. And, at a certain point, it's fairly clear, but again, there's been a lot of translations, and there's, you might, even if you have a translation that's 99% correct, which would, at least in terms of general percentages, be very good. But what if that 1% was one of the most critical words in the entire book? What if that one word that was mistranslated corrupted and perverted the entire meaning? Like the FBI lawyer, Kevin Kleinsmith, when they surveilled Carter Page and started the whole Russiagate, Trump, Russia collusion, delusion hoax. Basically it was because he removed a very key word, which was not, right? Because the CIA had said, yes, Carter Page is an operative, he works for us, and so the FBI lawyer just added in a word, not, and basically completely inverted the meaning of the entire thing and started us down this whole path. Of course, it's not Kevin Kleinsmith's fault that all of this happened. He's just a cog in a machine and thought that he was beyond reproach. But he was wrong, and many of them are wrong. Despite how many are black-pilled about the entire situation, always remember that everything can change on a dime. And when we enter a new dimensional threshold where chaos is almost guaranteed, chaos not like the BLM riots chaos, I'm talking about chaos like planetary upheaval, I'm talking about, the real climate change, I'm talking about earthquakes and volcanoes, I'm talking about, tidal waves and shit. It's what we are going to face when we start really moving through this galactic ecliptic, which we're already starting now, and that's what it meant to the ancients. What these time cycles meant was essentially signifying these periods of relative calm, these periods of relative chaos, and helping their progeny delineate those time periods so that they could survive and thrive. And so I believe that many of us have and are receiving that message. And I think, again, it's, the Bible's references to dreams and to visions. I think that connection to the dream world is absolutely kind of how we interface with the higher dimensions and with God in a lot of ways. And our dreams will speak to us in ways that no person in our waking life can, regardless of whether or not they're the Pope or just some priest or just some person or a bum on the street, right? When we speak in images, it's almost like that's the meme world, right? It's the world of images and of just forms. And, that's why memes are so effective, because it's actually communicating as we do in the dream world. It's communicating visually in addition to, sort of linear speech. And so that's basically, where I guess I get into the kind of conclusion and main point of it, which is that sin is a departure from the true path, right? You can see the true path as the straight and narrow line, right? It is basically that line, expanded is the entire universe, but also the line, think of it even as the line of your spine, the line of the energetic centers in your spine, and how everything in your entire body is connected to that spine. And, basically there is essentially it is normally flexible, and it moves and it twists around, and basically that enables us all of our range of movement and activity and operations in this world. And when we have that spine aligned, right, it actually can bend and make any frequency it wants, basically on an energetic sense. You can create any motion pattern or emotion pattern that you wish, almost on command, because your spine is aligned. Your energetic and physical spine is aligned. But when it is disaligned, when it is out of alignment, right, you are without that alignment, and so you don't have that perfect baseline, and so all of a sudden that range of movement, that potential range of movement, is curtailed and restricted. And so, basically this is kind of, I've talked about sin in the metaphysical sense as the sine wave, and also sin in Spanish, in Latin, is without, right? So sin is being without God. Sin is being without that alignment. Sin is being without that fractal communion, which enables you to be happy and productive and fulfilling the will of God in this world, which, also happens to be your own true will once, basically purified of its improper and impure contaminants. And so essentially, yes, sin is the sine wave out of alignment. Sin is without God. Sin is without fractal communion, just to reiterate the point. That is my metaphysical concept of sin. And so I believe that most of the sins enumerated by the Bible I would consider to be evidence of sin. Yes, they are forms of sin. I think that sometimes, basically based on these religions and these structures that people have created in this world, right? Jesus didn't create them. Mankind created them, using what they believe to be, or maybe not, Jesus's words and the words of, the prophets before him, so to speak, right? There's many books to the Bible, aren't there? And it's almost like God has a different demeanor in different ones, right? Sometimes he just destroys whole cities because he's just fed up with, the whole experiment and just decides to terminate it. And other times, basically he's more merciful. And I think that again, this world has gone through upheaval. We have had cataclysm. We did used to have a global civilization. It is, it's been very traumatic for us. And it takes time, it takes effort, it takes will to align the spine, the physical and the energetic spine, and to return to that fractal communion with God. But it is the most valuable and important work that a person can do. And if one does not purify the mind, body, and soul, there is no possible way to be in alignment with God. I don't care how much you've read the Bible. I don't care how long you've gone to church. I don't care about how much you know about this or that scripture. If you don't perform the work of purifying the mind, body, and soul, you are not a person of God. You cannot be. You're just one who wishes to be. And, but it's okay. That's a good place to be because you can always perform that work. You can always get it done. I mean, again, I've seen people, working in a vitamin shop, people who turned their life around in their 60s and, ended up just having a lot more happiness and mobility and vitality and cognition in their later years just because they started to finally clean up their body after decades of, toxic intake from the environment, from the food and the water and the air and the chemicals. I mean, people who work, with cleaning chemicals even, a lot of these are bad. It's, we should always respect the things that our forebears have gone through because they've been beaten and raped and stabbed and tortured and poisoned, and it's all been to create this world, right? Regardless of whether or not we recognize that or appreciate it, that is the fact of the matter. And I choose to be appreciative of that. I choose to align myself with the divine will of God. I choose to basically be a good person because I know that ultimately when I, turn my keys in and check out of this mortal coil, it'll be basically off to the races in a whole different way. And probably back here, maybe somewhere else, who knows. But I can't think of a better planet than this one. I don't know why I would try. And that, once we recognize that, is the exact moment we will actually understand both the mentality and the technology that we will need in order to colonize the moons of Saturn and Jupiter and to enter the wider sea of space. But that is our destiny, should we choose to accept it. For those who are willing to stick around and clean and align themselves so that you can participate and you can enjoy it, because it's a blast, man. It's exhausting sometimes, but it is surely a blast. And that's my video today on the Optimum trajectory. Hope you guys are having a good one. I'll see you next time. Peace.
Ah.